Have you ever sat down to binge some good old TV and thought, wait, where did all the black girls go?
We get it. This is Lost Credits, a podcast about the black girls we've loved and what popular culture does to them. I'm Ashley Wade.
And I'm Tamika Townsell.
We are professors, black feminist media scholars, and writers. We started Lost Credits to revive the conversation around representation in media studies.
That means we want to hear from you. Get in touch with us after the episode to let us know what you think.
And if you head to our website, you'll find bonus features like discussion guides, teaching tips, and recommended reading.
We start off each episode by inviting you into our heads with our replay segment. Quick takes on provocative things we're watching, reading, or listening to that we are itching to talk about. For this episode, we are going back about 20 years in time where we see the fictional hip-hop foursome, the Nasty Bitches, dominating the charts with their debut album. If you're following me here, that means you've made it through at least one episode of ABC's new series for fall 2021, Queens, created by Zahir McGee. This 60-minute musical dramedy follows the hip-hop group as they stumble through a very messy reunion. Each of the women is dealing with her own personal troubles, and as they try to mend the group, they realize that they haven't exactly dealt with the issues that broke them up 2 decades prior. What's special about this show for me is that we get to see 3 hip-hop/R&B stars return to the stage. Naturi Naughton of 3LW fame, Eve, former First Lady of the Rough Riders crew, and Grammy Award-winning Brandy, who actually has bars. So, Ashley, I have been wanting to have this conversation with you more than anyone else. Is Queens doing anything for you?
So, yes and no. I think that there are definitely entertaining parts of the show. And I'm an Eve fan, I'm a Brandy fan. So I like watching both of them on this show. And so that is something that I feel like I really enjoy. It's just seeing them in their element and like seeing Eve rap again. There's this one scene where she and Brandy are doing a cypher. I loved that scene. So like the music aspect of the show, I really love.
Yeah.
But there are other things about the show that I find really problematic. One of them is that it feels like the show is trying to do everything with the characters in terms of like checking these like boxes where, okay, we have to represent this group and we have to represent this group and we have to represent this kind of situation. And I'm thinking specifically about Naturi Naughton's character, Jill the Thrill. And so she's a Black lesbian Catholic living in Montana. And it's like, okay, y'all are doing a lot.
Yes.
with
Does that person even exist, right?
So there are things like that about the show that are off-putting for me. But I think overall, it's entertaining at the very least, but there are definitely some areas for critique.
For sure. You know, when I first started watching this show, of course, I thought that the name of the group was going to be Queens.
Right.
Not Nasty Bitches. And so there's this recurrent problem where everybody, at least all the women in the show, sound like their names are taken from Flavor Flav. Like these women are assigned names, how Flavor Flav would assign names to the contestants on Flavor of Love.
Correct.
Like Jill the Thrill, Professor Sex is Eve's character. I can't think of Brandy's
Explicit
character.
lyrics.
Yeah, explicit lyrics.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm just remember they are supposed to have been popular in the early 2000s. And so this is when I'm not even sure if you could say bitch on TV and radio.
Right.
So nobody would have named a group that.
Right.
And there's a episode where they sort of allude to the weirdness of that. And they say, oh, but we're making a statement like NWA, except for NWA was known as NWA.
Right.
So that's the first hint that I had that something about this show was off. And it feels very much to me like a caricature of actual hip hop artists who are women who they might have been. This is someone's, I would say, very limited interpretation of that. And when I found out that a man had indeed created the show and was pretty much the mind behind it, I gotta say I was not surprised.
Me either. And one of the things that really signaled to me that a man was behind writing the show was the character Butter Pecan and like how she functions as a foil to the Black women characters in a way that plays into all the stereotypes about both Black women and Latina women.
Yes.
And so that whole storyline with her and Brandy's character, where they're fighting over this man, it's so trite. I felt like as I was watching the dynamic between them that a woman, especially a woman of color, would not have written their roles in that particular way.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm watching this, I'm thinking, is this an episode of Jerry Springer? Is it an old take from, Flavor of Love, like the film that you didn't see? Like, that's what you get. When explicit lyrics and Butter Pecan are first reunited,
right,
they get into a huge fist fight.
Yes.
And these women are all in their 40s now.
Right.
And they are mature and they have all these things going on in their lives. I just don't see this unfolding like that. So I, in a sense, am sort of hate watching this show. I'm watching it because, like you, I gets down to some Brandy and some Eve. Like, I am here for us being reacquainted with their musical genius. They are superstars, and I am eager to have them be back a part of, our contemporary sonic culture. However, I could do without all of the melodrama. It feels very excessive.
Yes.
And I keep wondering what's wrong with just having a show about regular Black women, right? Like, why can't the drama be how this industry uses, exploits, and abuses Black women and how they're navigating that? Why can't it be, I don't know, based on actual Black women hip-hop R&B performers like an Eve or a Brandy? Why does the show have to delve into all of these sort of excessive storylines in order to be something that ABC thinks is worthy of, their platform?
Right. And I think part of that is that we're still dealing with this idea that somehow Black women's regular lives are not enough to sustain an audience.
This is something you get used to when you watch TV through a Black woman's eyes or from a Black girl's point of view. You get used to seeing people that look like you, but are yet unrecognizable. So many of the Black women and girls looking back at us on screen are someone else's twisted imagining of who we are and who we ought to be.
Black women and girls are seen but not heard. Even when we get to know Black girl characters, it's through their relationship to Black boys and men.
We see this phenomenon play out over and over again in popular culture. Some of the most iconic images of Black femininity emerge from the minds of Black men. When I was doing the research for my book, Branding Black Womanhood, which explores how Black women's empowerment became commodified, I was struck by how often I kept running into men. One of the classic examples of this is Essence magazine, which 4 men started in the late 1960s because they thought it would be a smart business move. These guys didn't necessarily have an allegiance to Black women, and initially they didn't even feel responsible for the political implications of their work. They saw themselves as young entrepreneurs setting out to cash in on an untapped market. The emotional and political distance they maintained from the magazine plays out in how they were known to treat their staff over the years. And in June 2020, a group calling themselves Black Female Anonymous publishes this open letter calling on the company's biggest sponsors to cease their relationship with the magazine until they acknowledge and rectify the issues that their mostly Black female staff has been complaining about for years to no avail. At this point, Essence is under the leadership of Rich Lou Dennis, who sold Shea Moisture to Unilever in 2018 and used the revenue to buy Essence. The anonymous writers of the open letter accused Essence of, quote, aggressively monetizing Black girl magic, but not internally practicing Black girl magic. That tells us that even when we see Black women and girls represented through dignified images, celebrated even, that's not always evidence of their treatment or status. Visibility is not power.
And to build on your last statement about how visibility is not power, I want to say something about Black girls and women's hyperinvisibility. So hyperinvisibility refers to a simultaneous hypervisibility and hyperinvisibility. So an example of this is when we see images of Black girls go viral on the internet, especially when those images reflect behavior that transgresses the bounds of respectability. In those instances, Black girls become hypervisible in the sense that many people see and comment on the images featuring these Black girls. And a lot of times those comments are harassment, they are degrading, they are, just tearing Black girls down. So they become hyper visible in that way. At the same time, they become hyper invisible because their humanity is buried under the sensationalism of the image. So like when we see a video of Black girls fighting, for example, and so no one thinks to ask, well, what happened before this? What are these girls going through? They become dehumanized through these viral images. So at the same time that they're hyper visible, they're also hyper invisible because we don't see who they really are. We just see this image that's been circulated.
Our screens and streaming accounts are full of series that stuff Black girls into the corners of Black men's domestic lives and Black boys' fantasies. And even still, from this limited space, some of these characters manage to captivate us, like Laura Winslow, the middle child in the African-American family sitcom Family Matters.
I'm sorry, Jimmy, but we can't dance.
Why not?
Because I'm about to break your legs.
What?
Nobody tells me who I can and cannot see. I'm my own woman and I can make my own decisions.
But baby,
I'm not your baby.
When ABC decides that they need a Black family in their primetime programming lineup, they turn to a team of white men, you guessed it, William Bickley and Michael Warren. They create and write the show. It was imagined as a spin-off of the sitcom Perfect Strangers, which featured Jo Marie Payton, aka Harriet Winslow, as an elevator operator. But William Bickley describes Reginald VelJohnson, who had recently played a sergeant on the 1988 hit Die Hard, Bickley claims that he's actually, quote, the centerpiece that Bickley and Warren built Family Matters around.
So even though they built this show around Carl Winslow's character, they also had storylines centering other characters on the show, like their daughter, Laura Winslow. So what did you like most about Laura Winslow?
One of the things that really resonated with me about Laura Winslow is that she was a middle child. I, too, was a middle child. I had two brothers instead of a brother and a sister, but I really connected to that, being stuck in the middle that we get from Laura. She is, older than Judy, but, she still gets picked on a little bit by by Eddie, her older brother. She's also very high achieving. She really wants to make all A's at school. She's also a cheerleader, so it's important to her to have like a full social life. In a lot of ways, I think that Laura captured truly what my life was like, certainly in my adolescent years. Another thing that we connect on is a lot of shows tend to be set on the coast. So you see a lot of shows that feature families or characters set in New York City or LA. But, the Winslow family lives in Chicago. So as a Midwesterner, Detroit specifically, that was something else that I connected with. One of the things that really fascinates me now, understanding that this show was created and continued to be written pretty much by two middle-aged white men, is the life that Kelly Williams, who plays Laura, was able to inject into this character, and her proximity to these other strong Black women figures. There's really a kaleidoscope of Black femininity that we end up getting on this show. Yes. It's across different generations. Aunt Rachel is always helping her out, especially with fashion and stuff like that. She has this loving but somewhat strict mother. And then her grandmother is this source of wisdom. But she's also the coolest grandma ever. Yes. So I love seeing Laura with these other Black women characters.
Yeah, and I think that intergenerational aspect is something that also appealed to me about her character and how it's written into the show, because I had that too.
So let's zero in a little bit more on Laura's character. What do you think she does for representations of Black girlhood in general, and then for you personally?
Laura's character is a good representation of everyday Black girlhood. Mm-hmm. She does, she has school, and they show her different trials and obstacles and challenges at school. Mm-hmm. She is a cheerleader, so she's involved in extracurricular activities, and she also has friends who are on the cheerleading squad. And I think that a lot of the later episodes, once she's in high school, show a lot more of those friendships, especially with Maxine. Mm-hmm. And so there's that aspect. She also is into dating, and that's okay. And one thing that I really liked about the show is that I liked how her parents kind of gave her a lot of freedom around dating. As she got older, there wasn't this obsession with making sure that she's not dating boys. The episode when she goes to the junior prom, she's dating a different guy in that episode than she was at the beginning of the season. And her parents are there's no discussion of it or making it taboo. It's okay for you to date. That's what dating is. Right. Just spending time with different people. Mm-hmm. And so I like that about the portrayal of her character, is that the fact that she dated wasn't scandalized. It was, something a normal part of girlhood. Mm-hmm. For me personally, it was just very nice to see a Black girl on a TV show who's not necessarily super rich, who's dark skinned in comparison to other actors that were typically on TV at that time.
Yep.
She looked like she belonged to Carl and Harriet.
Yes. Yes.
And she was smart. That was one of the things I really liked about her, because I was always a high achieving student. And so to see a character on TV who also is like that, who's a Black girl and who is encouraged in that way, like people don't try to make her feel bad about her high achieving. They don't try to, make her dim her light. So I really appreciated seeing a character portrayed in that way.
So to add to that, one of the things that really stands out to me, which is sort of superficial, but we know it is always deeper when you're talking about Black girls, and that is Laura's hair. Okay, so Laura goes on a typical journey and evolution of hair.
Yes.
That if you have been a Black girl, then you know that journey.
Yes.
Okay, and so starting off, you can tell like sis has been sitting between somebody's knees, getting that hot comb put in her head, okay? The roots sometimes are fuzzing up, which, of course, as a girl, I love that because you're playing, you're running around, you're very active, and you're not obsessed with your, puffy roots.
Right.
If you have a kinkier hair texture when you're, in middle school. But when you get into high school, we can see, like, Laura's hairstyle changing, and within a season and sometimes between seasons, we see her trying out different things. I felt like that was a subtle yet profound symbol and marker for us to grab onto as Black girl viewers.
I agree. Laura's character before the introduction of Steve Urkel was poised to be a central character on the show, especially given all of the things that we just talked about in terms of like how appealing she was, how great of an actor she is. But somehow, despite her being like such an important and likable and relatable character, her storyline was eventually subsumed by the male characters on the show, especially Steve Urkel. So let's unpack some examples of how male characters and or masculinity kind of stifled Laura's character development.
Hi, Mr. Winslow. I'm Steve Urkel. Is Laura ready for the dance?
Yeah, this is one of these meta moments when Steve Urkel's character enters Family Matters, because he was just meant to be this peripheral sort of throwaway character. They purposefully, the creators talked about making him incredibly obnoxious. It's rumored that he's eaten a rat. He walks around with a briefcase. His voice is nerdy. He has this slouch. This character was supposed to be essentially repulsive. And it's so interesting because the way that Steve Urkel enters Laura's life is through Carl Winslow's doing.
I have to tell you, Mr. Winslow, when my dad said you fixed me out with Laura, why, I thought I'd wet my pants. I've been crazy about her since the first grade, but she always thought I was some kind of a freak. Go figure.
Well, Steve, I didn't know she felt that way.
Laura is perplexed and a little stressed because she can't find a date to the dance. But she gets encouragement from Eddie to just, if she really wants to date a particular boy, that, she should just ask. And so she calls the guy that she's interested in, says, hey, do you want to go to the dance with me or not? And he says yes. But Carl Winslow, being what we're supposed to read as a very concerned and helpful dad, sets her up on a date with Steve Urkel, right? He makes that plan. The really crappy part about this is that he's never even seen Steve Urkel. So he really doesn't know much about this guy, except for that he's a guy that's Laura's age. And Eddie does a similar thing where he's literally pays his friend to take Laura to this dance. And so when this character is introduced into Laura's world, he ends up sort of taking over not just her world and those scenes, but the set that day. One of the things that we learn years later as the cast is reflecting back on the show, Jaleel White says that the show often would have trouble recruiting its live studio audience. Mm-hmm. And so on this particular day, when Steve Urkel is introduced, the audience is made up of a bunch of white frat guys, mm-hmm. is how he describes them. And they could not get enough of Steve Urkel. Apparently, the scenes that Steve wasn't in, they were like yelling Steve's name and like yelling these one-liners that he would say. So the studio audience of white men was obsessed with this imagining of black male geekdom that some other white men had created.
It was interesting how Steve's character wasn't even supposed to be a permanent fixture on the show, but then that particular white male gaze is what decided that he would become a regular, and not just a regular, but become the main character mm-hmm. of the show. Mm-hmm. That's called Family Matters, and we never see his family.
Exactly.
So that was just the beginning of how Steve's character displaces the importance of Laura's character. I just think about all of the episodes where he is trying to prevent her from dating other people, mm-hmm. or from dating people, period, because she's not dating him at that point. But there's an episode where Laura is supposed to go on this cheer competition in Omaha. At first, she was really nervous about asking her parents to go because she didn't think that they were going to let her go like on an overnight trip so far away. When they let her go, you know, she was excited. So Steve finds out that there's a boy on their like cheer squad who's also going to be going on the trip, and that Laura is kind of attracted to him. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so he goes on this tirade. He's like talking to Carl and Harry about how they shouldn't allow their daughter to go off to Omaha with this boy. And he actually refers to her as unsullied, which to me was a very disturbing word to use, because it's like, not only is he trying to keep her from dating this boy, but he has a specific investment in her virginity or her perceived virginity, because, I mean, how does he know that she is still a virgin?
Exactly.
Then it gets even worse. So at this point, Steve is already in a relationship with Myra, and he follows her to Omaha to spy on her. He's like hiding in a rollaway bed in her room. Like, that's peak stalker behavior. What really, really irritates me is at the end of the episode, Laura invites the boy into her hotel room before they're getting ready to go to this dance. And she's like sewing a button on his shirt, and it looks like they're about to start kissing. And that's when Steve comes out of the rollaway bed.
Okay, buddy, drop those lips. Steve, don't worry, I'll save you. You followed me to Omaha, crawled into a rollaway bed, and snuck into my room. What's your point?
And then Laura says, after Steve leaves, she says, well, you know, I think Steve is right. Like, my parents allow me to come here because they trust me. And so if I do something with you in this hotel room, I'm breaking their trust. I appreciate her having that sense of integrity, but I don't like the fact that it's attributed to Steve. Like, the fact that she comes to that realization is because of Steve, because what he did was wrong. There was nothing right about him following her to Omaha, hiding in her hotel room.
Laura's character in that way is pinned into a corner consistently where she really becomes reactionary.
Yes.
She is the object of Steve's affection. So her storyline, after Steve is introduced into the show, her storyline consists mostly of, rebuffing Steve's repeated attempts to date her, to get her to fall in love with him. And what keeps happening is that Steve's stalkerish behavior, his inappropriate violations of her privacy are consistently being reconfigured as innocent. And, really Laura's the bad one. Really, Laura is the one who is, transgressing, in this case, her parents' boundaries. And Steve is this, morally superior voice in the show. And that diverts our attention away from all of the really dangerous ways in which Steve is expressing his affection for Laura. And this is happening for years. There's one episode earlier on where Eddie and Laura have been playing pranks on each other. They've been going back and forth. And Eddie is upset because Laura put Jerry Curl activator in his deodorant. The plan that Eddie devises to get back at her really exceeds the level of prank that he had to endure. He convinces Urkel to climb up the tree that is outside of Laura's bedroom at night, while not just she is sleeping, but the whole family is sleeping. She's obviously attired in this case, she does have on like these very wholesome pajamas, but she could have had on anything because, she's in her own room in her house sleeping. But he climbs up the tree and is serenading her outside of her window. So he never actually climbs into the window. And this is framed as very humorous because he falls out of the tree and the whole family wakes up. And one of the most interesting parts of this show is that the whole family wakes up. Once they realize what's happening and see that it's Steve, they completely dismiss it as just innocent annoyance.
Laura, what is going on in here?
I guess Steve was practicing his accordion. He woke me up too.
That boy is Looney Tunes. Well, if he does it again, I'm gonna grab his bellows and make a wish.
There's a whole lot that could have gone wrong there. Laura was really vulnerable to any number of forms of assault. And in fact, just him, climbing up the tree to look at her even is a form of assault in and of itself because it's a violation of her privacy. Steve, even though he is committing the actions of a bad guy, never ends up being the bad guy.
That also goes to show how a lot of times women and girls don't feel protected by the police when they are experiencing these forms of assault that feel to other people like not really assault. So there was another female character on the show, and that was Myrtle Urkel. Myrtle is Steve's cousin, and she ends up coming after Steve does that serenading of Laura's. But it wasn't because he assaulted Laura or harassed Laura. It was because he hurt the neighbor's dog when he fell out of the tree.
Right.
So they send Steve away to his aunt and uncle, and then Myrtle comes in his place. So how does Myrtle Urkel's character reify the show's tendency to assert the importance of female characters only in connection to their relationship with male characters?
Well, one of the most obvious things here is that actually Myrtle Urkel is Steve Urkel, right? Jaleel White plays both characters. And it was so interesting for me to get reacquainted with this character because I had forgotten all about her. You know, we are used to thinking about this Black man in drag with Martin Lawrence in Big Mama's House or Tyler Perry as Medea. But this is a very early example of that. And what's interesting also is that Jaleel White is portraying a Black girl,
Right.
not an old Black woman. Myrtle is a girl. Her and Steve are around the same age. And yet, one of the really interesting components of this character is that she gets adultified. She is hanging out with Harriet Winslow and Aunt Rachel. She's a lot more interested in hanging out with them than she is with hanging out with Laura.
Right.
Even though she's supposed to be a girl, she's not really ever around the other kids. Her voice is more mature. She, like Steve, uses language that we don't necessarily associate with youth. She uses very seductive language. And so what Steve is to Laura, Myrtle is to Eddie. She sees Eddie and is instantly just infatuated. And the way that she talks to him and responds to him in her voice and her body all signals that she wants to seduce Eddie. In fact, at one point, she talks about her ammo of seduction. Laura convinces Myrtle that she needs to be more aggressive in trying to get Eddie to also like her. And Laura says, Eddie's just shy. You really got to come on to him strong. Laura coaches Myrtle in how to set this up. So Myrtle actually sneaks into Eddie's bedroom window at night while he is sleeping and none the wiser, and attempts to kiss him. Later on, the commotion in the room wakes everyone up, and I can't remember if it's Carl or Harriet, but one of them says, what's going on here? And Myrtle says, unfortunately, not much.
She's being what some people would say fast.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very easy for the audience to see how that's problematic, whereas they don't make it easy to see how what Steve is doing is problematic. It reinforces this idea about the almost sanctity of Black masculinity over, Black femininity. It normalizes a kind of masculine behavior that then becomes devious when Black girls enact those same kinds of behaviors.
Laura does something very similar to what Eddie does, but the dad, Carl, gets really upset when he finds out that Laura is the one who, put Myrtle up to this and orchestrated it. He is not as upset when Laura says, well, Eddie did the same thing to me. I'm just getting back at him. Carl literally says, I don't care what Eddie did. And it's Harriet who then has to discipline Eddie, but it is Myrtle's invasion that actually gets them to react.
Right.
Like upset parents, and gets them to talk to each other about what's happening.
And that also makes Laura look worse, too, because the way that her parents frame it is that she hurt Myrtle by, setting her up for this. But nobody reprimanded Eddie for hurting Steve in doing the same thing first.
Exactly. And it's Eddie who starts it. So there's something very problematic, not just about, the way these male characters and the female characters interact in the show, but what this overarching context of humor does. It really presents a distorted lens through which we are looking at the things that are playing out, which are actually very dangerous. And I wonder what might have happened had it been a more diverse writer's room, had that writer's room or the creators been people who cared a lot more about what these projections were implying about Black people, and then Black girlhood more specifically, and the ways in which Black girls are vulnerable, especially to this sort of sexual aggression. So we've talked a lot about all the different characters, family matters here, and how the character that was never meant to even really be on the show ends up taking over. And this really leaves us with one overarching question, Ashley. When we think about whether it's Family Matters or any number of sitcoms and cultural texts, why is Black popular culture so obsessed with redeeming Black masculinity?
I think that a lot of it is a symptom of broader patriarchal structures, especially in popular culture. I'm not saying that like popular culture is an avenue to liberation, but there's this idea that in order for Black liberation to happen, that Black men have to be liberated first. And then there will be this trickle down effect, even though we have seen over and over again that that's not how it works. And so I think that this obsession with redeeming Black masculinity is connected to this idea that Black men have to usher in the freedom for everybody else who's Black. And so there's this need to like show Black male characters in particular ways to contradict the stereotypes that have been created about them. And I do think that that is a necessary project, but we can't redeem Black masculinity at the expense of Black women and girls.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think as long as the concept of Black freedom is tethered to the patriarchy, then we will continue to see Black girls used as these building blocks to the ideal of dignified Black manhood or dignified Black boyhood. And that notion actually invites us to read Black male figures as always vulnerable and always susceptible to misrepresentation. And Black girls become sort of objectified and just used as these corrective props. What we have to recognize is that Black girls are already caught up in our own freedom struggle.
Right.
People got to figure out a way to ease their anxieties around the images of Black masculinity without Black girls and Black women as like the salve or the balm.
Agreed. Our lives and our struggles are interrelated. So it's not necessary for like one of us to get there first. We need to all get there at the same time. And so in order for that to happen, I think that there has to be a more conscious recognition of the fact that Black girls and women deserve to be heard. It's not just enough for Black girls and women to be seen on screen, but they also have to be heard as well.
We want our presence to be both visualized and felt.
Yes.